ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादशङ्करं लोकशङ्करम् शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं वादरायणम् सूत्रभाष्यकृतो वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः सच्चिदानन्दरूपाय विश्वोत्पत्त्यादिहेतवे तापत्रयविनाशाय श्रीकृष्णाय वयं नुमः यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुरेव परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः श्रीचिन्मययतीशस्य गुरुं वन्दे तपोवनं तं हिमवद्विभूतिं वै ज्ञानवैराग्यरूपिणं समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरम् ॐ नमः श्री चिन्मय सद्गुरवे नमः। Hari Om to everyone else. From today we are starting one new class, new text, little more higher study. Than Tattva Bodha. As we have finished Tattva Bodha, it has a big impact. And I hope maximum of you can remember the impact, the essence of Tattva Bodha. If you can't remember it thoroughly, I hope whenever those sort of things will come, you can remember it. So this study will be in a little bit different way this time. I will introduce this text in a little elaborated manner, but this is not that much of elaboration. Uh, can't you hear?
No sound.
Am I not audible to everyone else?
Now.
Yes. So the thing is, as I have chalked out, well, I will try to give a nutshell on Vedanta, and then the slokas we will cover it because they are very easy. It will be the new style of these texts. So please don't poke me when you will start the sloka, when will you start the sloka. In this text, I want to give a little big introduction. It is better for you. It's a wonderful introduction it will be. Please keep faith in me. Hari Om. The thing is, yes, the Atma Bodha or self-knowledge or self-realization is a short treatise on Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-dualistic Vedanta. It consists of only 68 verses in melodious Sanskrit and is believed to have been composed by Adi Shankaracharya ji, the great philosopher of non-dualism. According to the generally accepted modern view, Shankaracharya ji was born during the 8th century after Christ in the village of Kaladi on the west coast of southern part of India. He belonged to the simple, scholarly and industrious Nambudri parivar or sect of Brahmins of Malabar region. After completing the study of the Vedas, Bhagavatpad Shankaracharya ji renounced the world at an early age in quest of truth and was initiated into the monastic life by the great ascetic Govindapada, who was the student of famous Gaudapadacharya ji, the Karikakar of Mandukya Upanishad. Presently, he devoted himself to the practice of spiritual austerities, meditation, and yoga. Before long of Shankaracharya spiritual genius and intellectual uh, efficiency, acumen were acknowledged by the leading philosophers of India. He engaged himself in reforming the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion of the Hindus, and with that end in view, wrote commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, the Brahma Sutra, and the principal Upanishads. He became the personification of the wisdom of the Vedas. He traveled the length and breadth of India, preaching the divinity of the soul and the oneness of existence. Before his death, at the age of 32 only, at Kedarnath in the Himalayas, Bhagavan Shankaracharya ji had established 4 monasteries at the 4 directions in India, like Sringeri Matha in Mysore in the south, in Puri in the eastern part of India, there is Dwarka Mutt. Then in the north, there was Joshimat or Jyotirmat. And in Dwarka, in Kathiawar, Gujarat, which is in the western part of India, and had placed 4 of his gifted disciples, each well versed in one of the 4 Vedas, in charge of them. He recognized the ancient Vedic order of sannyasins and assigned to it the spiritual leadership of Hindu society. Bhagavan Shankaracharya ji lived during the, decadent period of Buddhism, and Hinduism was beginning to reassert itself, but true leadership was lacking. The country was honeycombed with conflicting sects. A spiritual confusion reigned everywhere, and people were perplexed, confused, bewildered. Bhagavan Shankaracharya's work at this critical time was the salvation of the Vedic culture. He met opponents from other schools in open debates, refuted their views, and re-established the supremacy of non-dualistic Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta. In the midst of his ceaseless activities, he found time to write small philosophical treatises and compose hymns in praise of the Hindu deities in order to quicken the longing of aspirants after the spiritual life. In him, one finds the unusual combination of philosopher and poet, servant and saint, mystic and religious reformer, debater of a rare forensic power, and passionate lover of God. There exist three great misconceptions regarding Bhagavan Sankaracharya's philosophy, both in India and in the West. Okay. The first of these is that he discourages the performance of duties and he advocates the discipline of non-action for the realization of truth. Bhagavan Shankaracharya's position regarding action and the performance of duties may be briefly stated. The nature of Atman or Atma or the soul, three are same. Atman is the Nakaranta Napumsaklinga and its Prathama Ekavachanam is Atma. So Atman or Atma or the soul are three, one thing. So that soul is existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. It is the very embodiment of peace, desirelessness, perfection, truth, beauty, infinity, and eternity. On account of Maya or ignorance, man has forgotten his true nature and finds himself entangled in the relative world of good and evil, pain and pleasure, life and death, and the other pairs of opposites. From the cradle to the grave, the illumined soul engages in ceaseless action, striving to shun evil and realize the good. But his activities are influenced by love and hate, raga, dvesha, attachment and aversion, and he hopes to experience through action infinite and eternal happiness in the outside world. He roams aimlessly in samsara, the world of change and becoming, rising or falling according to the results of his own karma, of his own action. Only gradually does he discover the impossibility of attaining abiding happiness through work associated with I consciousness and the desire for results. Infinite blessedness is not possible through any finite action governed by the law of cause and effect. That we have seen in the definitions of Vedanta. We have elaborately discussed about it. Then that soul learns, Jiva learns from his teacher and the scriptures that karma or work, in order to produce a spiritual effect, must be performed as yoga combination. That is to say, the doer must regard himself as an instrument in the hand of God. Surrender surrender to God the results of action and remain unruffled by love or hate. Raga dveshe bahar jana. Work performed in the spirit purifies the heart and makes it inclined to the cultivation of meditation and self-realization or Atma Bodha. Gradually, outer action drops away, reduced to a minimum sufficient only for the maintenance of the body. The actor remains satisfied with what comes of its own accord without feeling attachment to the agreeable or aversion for the disagreeable, devoting himself, heart and soul, to the contemplation of Atma, which is the sole reality by means of knowledge or jnana. He at last realizes the true nature of the soul, attains peace, and is liberated from the endless suffering of the world. The liberated man engages in service to humanity, but his activities are quite different from those of an illumined person. He is free from I consciousness and the longing for results. He never loses the knowledge of Atma. In his action, he recognizes the influence of the guna, which constitute man's physical nature. At their, uh, at their bidding, the organs performs action. That he can understand. but the soul is always immersed in peace. Thus, though appearing to be active, he is really actionless. This is called Naishkarmya Siddhi. कर्म में अकर्म को देखना और अकर्म में कर्म, according to Bhagavad Gita. He sees non-action in action. If the soul is identified with action, even to the slightest degree, it has not realized its true nature. Now the second point about Bhagavan Sankaracharya's works and the conflicts. It is contented, especially in the West, that because of Sankaracharya's staunch loyalty to the non-dualistic ideal of Brahman or the absolute, he is an enemy of the gods and goddesses of popular religion. Undoubtedly, he held ultimate reality to be beyond name and form and of the nature of pure consciousness. He also stated that the direct method for realization of Brahman is not worship, but the path of knowledge. Jnanena eva tu kaivalyam. Jnanena vina muktir na bhajati, which consists in hearing the instruction of a teacher, reflecting on its meaning, and lastly, meditating on truth with single-minded devotion. Philosophical discrimination or viveka and renunciation of the unreal, means vairagya, constitute for Shankaracharya ji the basic disciplines for realization of Brahman. Yet he was aware that few aspirants are strong enough to climb this steep path. The majority require a tangible symbol of truth, anthropomorphic or otherwise. The terminology, anthropomorphic, and also a human relationship with a personal God. Many maximum sadhakas, we have our personal deity. We have a good, nice, sweet, touchy, emotional relationship with our personal God. For them, prayer and supplication form an indispensable part of worship. Out of compassion for these seekers, Bhagavan Sankaracharya ji composed many hymns in praise of such popular deities of Hinduism as Shiva, Vishnu, and the Divine Mother. As one reads these hymns, one is impressed by the magnanimity of Bhagavan Sankaracharya, who having attained the highest vision of the Absolute brought himself down to the level of ordinary worshippers, smitten with the idea of many transgressions, assumed their attitude of insignificance and helplessness, and prayed to the Lord for grace to attain liberation from the many miseries of worldly life. These hymns are recited daily by countless devotees all over India at times of prayers and worship. They demonstrate the grand sweep of Bhagavan Shankaracharya's mind. Through all the hymns, dualistic or monistic, is expressed the longing of the devotee for freedom from ignorance, which alone is responsible for suffering in all its forms. Even in his theistic hymns, Bhagavan Shankaracharya ji never permits one to forget that Brahman alone is the foundation of all relative ideas, and that the effulgence of pure consciousness radiates through the vesture of name and form. The devotees catches a glimpse of the Absolute through the form of the personal God, who is the highest manifestation of infinite that a finite mind can comprehend on the relative plane. Bhagavan Shankaracharya ji, re-established this principle in his philosophy. The beginner learns the art of concentration through worship of the personal God or Saguna Brahma, and acquires purity of heart through performance of unselfish duties, endowed them with concentration and purity. He sets himself to the task of acquiring the knowledge of Brahman and realizes in the end the impersonal Absolute. Bhagavan Shankaracharya ji initiated the worship of Shakti or the Divine Mother in his monasteries. And third point, it is said by some of Shankaracharya's Western critics that he moved away from the teachings of the seers of the Upanishads. The Upanishads, these critics contend, hold forth an optimistic and affirmative view of life, whereas Shankaracharya ji, through his doctrine of Maya, describes the world as a snare and a delusion. His philosophy is regarded by them as pessimistic and negative. That this charge is without foundation will be realized by readers of the introduction and the text of this book. It is to Shankaracharya's everlasting glory that it points out through unimpeachable reasoning the spiritual nature of the world and the individual soul. Sankaracharya ji takes every opportunity to insist that the true essence of man and the universe is existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute, Satchidananda. It is only when the individual sees a difference between Brahman and himself and the universe that he becomes a victim of fear, suffering, and misery. The characterization of a deluding names and forms as Maya and the injunction to renounce the unreal as a means to realization of truth are not new ideas of Shankaracharyaji's, but are both explicit and implicit in Upanishads. The purpose of Vedanta study is Atyantik Dukkha Nivritti and Paramananda Prapti. The total cessation of grief, anxiety, depression, doubts, fear, and attainment of bliss absolute. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Harihi Om.